Have you ever seen those structures that they found under the ocean outside of Japan? And they've tried to say that these things are naturally occurring. There's portals, there's all this stuff down there.
A mysterious flash over the Indian Ocean that's never been solved. Dozens of ghost ships drifting into Japanese waters full of decaying corpses. One of the most haunted islands in the world, and more. These are dark and disturbing ocean mysteries that are impossible to solve. One of the creepiest unsolved mysteries of the ocean is the Vela Incident. It was September 22nd of 1979 when a strange, bright flash of light lit up the skies near the Indian Ocean. The flash was detected by an American satellite which was monitoring for nuclear tests. Now, this flash appeared to be from a nuclear explosion, but it didn't come from any country that was openly conducting tests at the time. The location of the flash was near the southern coast of Africa, and it seemed to match the exact area where an unknown ship might have been conducting a secret nuclear test, but no one knew who would have been behind it. Some theories go that it could have been Israel testing a nuclear weapon in secret, or even a rogue South African operation, but no one's ever come out and said anything. Here's the extra eerie part though. Despite what seemed to be a nuclear test, there was no fallout, no debris. It's a very strange case, and most of the details about it seem to be pretty hush-hush. So was it a secret nuclear test, an accident, or something else entirely? The Palmyra Atoll is said to be one of the most eerie remote places on Earth. This tiny island, just 1.5 miles long, was discovered in 1798 by Captain Edward Fanning, who supposedly had a strange feeling about it before even seeing it. Fanning, sailing through the Pacific, was jolted awake 3 times during the night by an intense sense of danger. The final time, he found himself inexplicably dressed and rushing to the deck. His gut feeling led him to stop the ship for the night, and in the morning they saw what he had sensed: deadly reefs lying just ahead. If he'd ignored his instincts, the ship and its crew would have been lost. Since then, Palmyra's become rather infamous for bizarre and tragic events. One of the most disturbing incidents happened in 1974 when a couple, Mac and Muff Graham, arrived on the island for a visit. They were joined by another couple, Buck Walker and his girlfriend Stephanie Stearns, but things quickly turned dark. Walker, a fugitive with a violent past, killed the Grahams for their boat and supplies. According to Stearns, Walker killed them and their bodies were hidden in a metal container. Muff Graham's remains were discovered 6 years later by a couple visiting the island, washed up on the shore. It was found that Muff had been dismembered before being burnt and dumped. Mac's remains, however, were never found. But that's not the only dark thing to have taken place here. Hal Horton, a Navy officer stationed on Palmyra during World War II, spoke openly about the strange and tragic incidents that seemed to plague this island, including aircraft vanishing. Horton was quoted telling of how at least 2 planes were lost in broad daylight, their pilots mysteriously vanishing. He also mentioned the frequent equipment malfunctions that pilots experienced while landing or taking off from the island. According to Horton, these issues were so frequent that sailors and officers stationed there started calling it the Palmyra Curse. Horton described the island as incredibly small, so much so that a plane flying just 10,000 feet above it on a cloudy day might not even spot it. Once we heard a plane overhead, but he crashed in the drink before he could find the runway, Horton said. Tragically, the pilot didn't survive. We didn't get to the poor guy fast enough. Sharks found him first, he added. It didn't seem like it was just all bad luck. There was apparently this sense that something was just off about the place. In 2015, Japan's Coast Guard came across at least 12 wooden boats carrying the decaying bodies of 22 people. Some were nearly skeletons, 2 were even missing heads. The first boat appeared in October, and then more turned up in November. The Japan Coast Guard was left trying to piece together the mystery as to where these boats came from and what had happened to the people on board. The boats looked like they'd come from North Korea. One clue was found on a boat that carried 10 decomposing bodies. The hull had Korean lettering that read North Korea's military. Another clue was a tattered piece of cloth which looked like it could be from a North Korean flag. Some believe these boats were just just lost fishing vessels. Others think they might have been used by defectors trying to escape North Korea. The thing is, this isn't an isolated incident. North Korean ghost ships wash up in Japan all the time. Every year, derelict boats from North Korea wash up on Japan's shores, some with no crew, others carrying the remains of those lost at sea. Most of these ghost ships seem to be North Korean fishermen who get stranded out at sea, but that doesn't explain every case. In March of 1918, the USS Cyclops, a massive Navy ship nearly 550 feet long, vanished without a trace, leading to one of the biggest mysteries in naval history. The ship, carrying a crew of 306 and tons of manganese ore, was on its way from Brazil to Baltimore. The last message sent was simply, "Weather fair, all well," but the ship was never heard from again. Not even an SOS was received. She just disappeared as though some gigantic monster of the sea had grabbed her, men and all, and sent her into the depths. That's what was written in Santa Fe magazine a couple years after the disappearance. Now, as for what happened, some think maybe a German submarine sank the ship, but no evidence ever turned up to support that. Marvin Barish, whose ancestor was one of the Cyclops' crew, has spent years researching this mystery. He believes mechanical failures combined with the ship's heavy cargo may have caused it to capsize, especially near the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest part of the Atlantic. He's still hoping that modern technology might one day uncover the wreckage, saying, "I just want her to be found. I want the 309 to be at rest, as well as the families." In 1946, something strange happened over Scandinavia. Reports started flooding in from Sweden, Finland, and Norway about bright, mysterious objects in the sky. Sometimes during the day, and sometimes at night. One report even mentioned a rocket-like object crashing into a lake, but nothing was ever recovered. These sightings became so widespread that the phenomenon was dubbed the Swedish ghost rockets. Some think the objects were Soviet missiles, leftovers from German V-2 rockets. In fact, by 1946, the Soviets had begun their own missile program, testing missiles in the exact region where the ghost rockets were reported. The timing fit perfectly, and for a while, a lot of people believed these rockets were Soviet-made weapons being tested in secret. But it turns out that the Soviets hadn't actually launched any V-2 missiles in 1946. After the war, the Germans' V-2 factories were mostly scavenged by the Allies, and the Soviets were behind in missile development, so while it made sense at the time, we're just not sure if that theory holds up today. As the reports continued to come in, though, back in the day, the press began calling the objects flying bombs. Some even speculated they were alien spacecraft. Eventually, scientists came out saying there was no solid evidence that any missiles had been launched, and said that some of these supposed rockets were probably just shooting stars. But if that were the case, I mean, why was it only happening then? What, I mean, people had never seen a shooting star before? It just seems like a weak explanation to me. Till this day, we still don't know for sure what happened over the Baltic Sea that year. The Michigan Triangle, which makes up this area of the water that you see here, is almost just as strange as the notorious Bermuda Triangle. Over the years, ships, planes, and the people on them have vanished, and many of these cases are still unsolved. One of the earliest incidents dates back to 1679, when the French sailing ship Le Griffon disappeared without a trace after leaving Green Bay. No wreckage has ever been found for that one. Then there's the bizarre case of the Roosevelt, a schooner that capsized twice with no sign of its crew. In 1921, the ship was found overturned, the crew missing. Even more strange, the captain had a premonition before setting sail and had refused to board that day, which ended up saving his life. On April 28, 1937, Captain George R. Donner was in command of a ship traveling from Erie, Pennsylvania to Port Washington, Wisconsin. One night, Donner went back to his cabin after a long shift. His second mate was supposed to wake him once they were at their destination, but when the mate went to check on him a few hours later, Donner was gone, and they searched every inch of that ship, but he was never seen again. The most infamous case It was on June 23rd of 1950 though. A flight piloted by Robert C. Lind was en route from New York to Minneapolis when it hit bad weather near Chicago. The plane changed course and headed over Lake Michigan. Around midnight, Lind requested to drop the altitude, but his request was denied. And that was the last communication anyone heard from Flight 2501. It vanished, and its last known position was within the Michigan Triangle. In 2006, a ghost ship was spotted drifting off the coast of Queensland, Australia. The vessel, identified as the Jian Seng, didn't show any signs of a struggle. There was a broken tow rope, but that was about it. A patrol vessel was sent in to investigate, and when they boarded this empty ship, they found it eerily quiet. There were no signs that any violent struggle had happened or anything like that. It was just an empty ship floating along, and it looked like it had been floating for a while because it was completely out of fuel. Stranger though, the origin of the ship has never been found. Nobody knows where it came from or where it was going. It hadn't been registered and no search had ever been made for it. There was a large amount of rice on the ship though, which has led some to believe that this was a resupply vessel for fishing boats. The Devil's Sea, also known as the Dragon's Triangle, is like the Pacific Ocean's version of the Bermuda Triangle. Located off the coast of Japan, the area has become rather infamous for strange magnetic anomalies, unexplained lights, and of course, unsolved disappearances. Japanese fishing authorities even consider it a dangerous spot. One of the most chilling stories happened in 1952, when Japan sent out a research vessel to investigate the Devil's Sea. The ship and its 31-person crew disappeared without a trace. As for what's really behind it all, you have your standard theories. Aliens, portals to parallel universes. Some scientists think volcanic activity in the region could explain the disappearances, but whatever the cause, it seems like this area gets its name for a very good reason. Flight 19 was a US Navy training flight that disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle on December 5th of 1945. The flight involved 5 TBM Avenger bombers led by Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, along with 14 crew. They were on a routine training exercise. No one was expecting anything to go wrong, but it did. It began when Lieutenant Taylor's compasses started malfunctioning. After completing their tasks, Taylor and his crew got lost. Radio transmissions showed that Taylor thought he was over the Florida Keys, but his compass was giving false readings. At one point he said, "I am over land, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down, and I don't know how to get to Fort Lauderdale." As the confusion continued to grow, other pilots in the group said, "Well, why don't we fly west and head back to Florida?" But Taylor insisted on continuing in the wrong direction. By the time they realized something was seriously wrong, they were far out over the Atlantic, with their fuel running low. Taylor radioed, "We are heading 030 degrees for 45 minutes, then we will fly north to make sure we are not over the Gulf of Mexico." But the weather was getting bad, and radio contact started cutting out. Taylor's last message, "All planes close up tight, we'll have to ditch unless landfall," was heard just before they vanished. While all this was happening, another aircraft was sent to search for Flight 19, but it also disappeared. Until this day, there's never been any trace of the missing planes or the crew. With all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.